Yeah. So, well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. I love your story. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. So, before we get into your life as a tech startup founder and a business executive, 4 years ago, we were getting a handle on this pandemic. Everything came to a stop and everything changed. How did you get through the pandemic and how did it change you?
Um, well, we got through the pandemic. I mean, as a business, we got through just fine. In fact, we thrived.
Yeah.
And my business partner was always on the East Coast while I was on the West Coast. So we were a digital first company from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So while we had an office and a team back in South Carolina, it was easy for everyone to just pick up their laptops and go home for the duration. So we did that, and our tool that we developed and sold actually gave deep information on senior Fortune 500 executives to our customers, and it was used by sales and marketing teams who were trying to sell huge technology deals into these companies, and often the senior executives were part of the decision making process. So when the pandemic hit, what happened at big enterprises is the senior executives prioritized speaking to customers and partners and suppliers to make sure that they were okay so that their businesses could continue to operate. And prior to the pandemic, they might spend a whole day traveling to get to one customer meeting. During the pandemic, they were stuck at home, and so they could do 10 customer meetings in a day. And so suddenly they needed this deep intelligence on who they were going to be talking to.
Yeah.
So our company thrived during the pandemic. And then another dimension of that is big trade shows and events, which was also a way to engage with senior executives. Those were shut down. So marketers suddenly had all this um, deposits returned from big event venues, and they had to redeploy that budget somewhere. So we were one of the beneficiaries of all of that. And then once they got a taste of our solution, it was pretty sticky. Like they wanted more. And so when the pandemic started to taper off, um, and people started coming back in person, they still renewed our solution. But we sold in January 22, so it was still COVID-ish at that time, right?
Yeah.
And so we sold shortly after the pandemic.
So if I was to put you right now in 2024 in front of a bunch of third grade students at career day and one of the kids said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer that child?
You mean, what do I do right now?
Yes.
I help average people understand entrepreneurship so that they can access this kind of career for themselves, so they can be entrepreneurs themselves. So, traditionally, especially in the Bay Area where I live, entrepreneurs come from, the Ivy League schools primarily, and they go right into this Silicon Valley pipeline with high powered venture capital, lots of incubators like Y Combinator. They go straight into this very elite world. Um, and there's a playbook for that in that world of how you build and scale and sell a company. And it's a playbook that is not relevant or accessible to most people. And I believe it makes people give up before they even start.
Yeah.
Now that last part might be a too high level for third graders,
Uh,
but
No, I think they're a lot smarter these days. So I'm curious, when you were in the third grade, what did you want to be when you grew up?
oh, I didn't know. I mean, I think my earliest memory of what I wanted to do was to be a veterinarian. And then, I quickly realized like I don't like blood or any kind of medical stuff of
Yeah.
any kind. So
Yeah.
I just loved animals, and I still do, but I was not going to be, did not have the appetite for the schooling nor the blood and guts that comes along
Yeah.
with it.
For sure. So talk to me a little bit about childhood, where you were born and raised, and how these seeds of getting into being an entrepreneur and technology, how did all of this take hold for you?
Well, I was born and raised in San Diego, and I lived in a little town. which is right at the end of I-8. You can't go any farther in the US than Ocean Beach, which is where I grew up. And it was in the 70s, it was a little bit of a rough place, lots of drugs and hippies and counterculture. And my mom worked for the government as a civilian doing computer programming. So that was, she was in tech, because in the beginning, in the 60s, computer work was considered clerical women's work. And so she was hired without a college degree to go and work with the punch cards and all of that for the U.S. government. My father worked for, he was a blue collar guy, and he worked for the airlines, for an airline that's no longer around called PSA. And but he hated working for other people, and he eventually became somewhat of an entrepreneur himself, taking the money that my mother had saved and buying rundown apartment buildings by the beach and renting them out. So he spent most of my formative years. That's what he was doing, and um, so early on, I got that sense of some people just don't like working for other people. I didn't put myself in that category until much later, though. So
Yeah.
I see the through line between my mom's um, career in tech and kind of understanding that, and then my dad's penchant for working for himself and making his own way.
So who's been a hero and inspiration for you?
Well, I think my mother, to a certain degree, she had a terrible childhood and left home at 17 and never looked back. Cut ties with all her family, came to California from Virginia, and lived in the YWCA, and then was hired by the government. And at the time, uh, the workplace was not nearly as friendly for women as it is now, even though we still have our problems. And she was only one of two working mothers of all my friends in elementary school. And coincidentally, the other working mother worked at the same place she did. The government was a safe place for women to have careers, because it was much harder to discriminate against them, although they were definitely discriminated against. At one point, she applied for a promotion, and her boss said, "This is a man's job. This is not a job for women."
Wow.
Because men have families they need to support, so they should get the higher paid, higher ranking jobs. And she worked for the government for 30 years, and in the end, she was working alongside people with master's degrees, and in fact she was training them, but then they would go to on to outrank her because they had the educational background that she didn't.
Wow. So if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would that be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that is such a hard question. I only get one, so that's a big
Well,
question.
you could have a round table.
Well, one of the people who I've just been admiring lately is Kara Swisher.
Yeah.
I mean, she's not a household name, but in tech, she definitely is. And she and I will go back and forth on social. Like, she'll respond to my posts sometimes, but she's just written a book that's similar. Although she's just an amazing writer, I can't touch her there. But it's kind of a hybrid biography and history of tech, or autobiography and history of tech. And I'm coming out with a book next month that is my story, my entrepreneurial memoir, but also the history of my career and my company. And also, since I was in San Francisco in the late 90s working at startups, it's a history of the advent of the internet in, the place where it really took off in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, and it was nuts. And so there's a lot of that in my book, which I think is pretty entertaining. And
Yeah.
the title of my book is uh, Scaling with Soul: How I Built and Sold a $25 million tech company Without Being an Asshole. And Kara is, she chronicles the worst of the worst and the people who are giving tech entrepreneurs a bad name. In San Francisco, even though a lot of our prosperity here is related to tech, rank and file people living here do not have a positive opinion of tech entrepreneurs. We call them tech bros, and
Yeah.
they can be quite toxic. They have a toxic reputation, but that is not representative of the majority of entrepreneurs or even entrepreneurs in tech. And Kara writes about all that, and I would just love to have a conversation with her about that, in addition to other things related to some of the newer technologies like AI and where it's headed.
Yeah. So speaking of your career and your book coming out, what's been the motivation for you all of these years to get up, to do the work, to be an entrepreneur, to help others, and to push technology? What's been that drive for you?
I love change and I love new things. And even though I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming into tech, I love it. I love the tech industry, and I think I love it because it does change so rapidly. And a lot of people are intimidated by that because you have to keep up. But I find that fun,
Yeah.
because I do get bored easily. I like to move fast, and it's a great industry for people who enjoy that.
So in the realm of technology, what's the one tech company that's really risen to prominence that you really respect and admire the way that they do things now and just kind of maybe how they've risen up through the ranks?
There are a few. I mean, they're different flavors. I really admire, and here's another woman I wouldn't mind spending time with. And I can't even think of her name right now, but the CEO of Canva. I think
Okay.
she's from maybe Australia. Um, and she bootstrapped that company. I know the product is so respected and people love it. And it's also a company that operates with a lot of integrity, but she keeps a very low profile. Like, she's done things that are more impressive than a lot of the people we hear from a lot who are very loud in tech, but she just keeps a pretty low profile, which is why I can't remember her name at the moment.
It's
Uh,
Melanie Perkins.
yes, very
Yeah.
impressive, what she's done. I haven't read the story recently, but I've been reading about it over the years. And, she just keeps a low profile. And the other one locally that I admire, even though it does get a lot of criticism, which I think is inevitable when you're a company this big, I really admire Salesforce and Mark Benioff. He's a great citizen here in San Francisco. He does a lot of excellent things for the city. I learned that Salesforce was a big customer of my company, Boardroom Insiders, and they were wonderful to deal with. And they were so smart and thoughtful with how they rolled out our tool across their enterprise, because we were at the time, like $2 million company. And here they were rolling out our little tool across the whole enterprise. And they knew from experience that that could potentially just bury us in a wave of users and requests. So they were very thoughtful in how they rolled it out, and they partnered with us carefully. And I admired that. And also Mark Benioff, he said something in the press once about public schools, and I'm a big public school advocate. So I sent him an email and I criticized him for what he had said. It was a Sunday night. He replied right back to me, and he was very kind, and explained himself, and we had a little bit of back and forth. And it was not a handler, it was him. So I admire that also.
So you have to dispense good advice to your clientele. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh my goodness, these are such good, hard questions. What's the best advice I've ever gotten? Um, I've gotten this advice many times And I've had to learn the lesson over and over. And it's not always put in the same way, but it all comes down to you. You know, in the end, you own it, you're responsible, you have the most to win or lose. So whether you're working with a vendor or a team, or a partner, you obviously can't do everything yourself without these types of people, but the oversight and the visibility that you need to have is critical. So don't take your eye off the ball. And an example of this is when I was selling my company and I hired an M&A banker. I had a deal team, I had lawyers, a banker, I had accountants, and my executive team at my company. And the day the offer came in, I was really unhappy with the offer. It was a lot lower than I expected it would be. And um, my banker was like, well, you can negotiate a little bit, but I don't think they'll go up much from this. And, he was incentivized to get it closed, right? Um, because I know they were swamped with a bunch of other deals. And I called one of my advisors who's done a lot of these deals before. And he said, what do you want? You don't listen to what he wants. You don't know what's going on with him. He might have 5 other deals stacked up that he just wants you off his plate. He said, what do you need? And you go back and ask for it and you tell them why. So even though I had this banker who was going to get $1 million fee off my deal, it was really up to me to sit down and think, what do I want and why should they give it to me? And so I put it all in writing, very thoughtful. And I was asking for 50% more than they offered. So that's a lot, right? So I sent it to my banker and I said, I want you to go back to the buyer, and this is exactly what I want you to say. I want you to say exactly what I've written here. And he did, and we didn't get the 50%, but we got 25% more.
Nice.
So um, I've had to learn that lesson over and over because I you hire someone to do something for you and you just want it taken care of, but you can never let go of the oversight and understanding everything that's happening, because ultimately if you have the most to win and the most to lose, it's on you.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you this, of all of these things that you've done in your life and become and overcome and achieved, what are you the proudest of?
Oh, that's easy. I don't consider myself a people person. I'm an introvert. um, I don't like small talk, things of that nature. And we had to build a team at the company. And I was just one of the biggest surprises about myself is how much I enjoyed managing, hiring, developing talent at the company, particularly people right out of school, young people. I just loved that. And that is something that I talk about a lot in my social media content. It's something I consult with a lot of other entrepreneurs about, because, there's this kind of trope out there about Gen Z and how they don't want to work and how terrible they are and how irresponsible. And I don't agree with that at all. 83% of Gen Zers are looking for mentorship. And I think just about 50% are saying they're actually finding it. And with the remote work uh, reality we have now, they want that more than ever and are probably getting it less than if they were in the office. So I counsel other entrepreneurs on ways that they can put that kind of mentorship relationship in place, because I think we did a very good job with that at Boardroom Insiders. And that was my biggest surprise, is how much I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So I know AI is the big thing that everybody's talking about right now, but let's say we go 10 years deep from right now. Where do you think technology is going? Even beyond AI? Is it even anything that you've thought about that's materialized into some reality?
Um, there are so many people more qualified to answer that than me because I am a non-technical founder.
Sure.
However, I am more on the people side of things
Yeah.
where and user side of things. And I think AI's, you know, game changing, of
Yeah.
course. But every time you see new technical capabilities that take away the real human aspect of communication, you always see the pendulum swing a little bit back in favor of authenticity and real people and real emotion. So, for example, when we started Boardroom Insiders, pretty much the entire time I was running the company, the big thing in marketing, and we sold to marketers, was marketing automation software. So instead of writing an email to each individual prospect, you would kind of blast out an email campaign, and it would be segmented to target certain audiences. But as a recipient of a lot of that, you just see it's generic stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so they can say, "Hey, Sharon, so what? I know the rest of it means nothing to me."
Yeah.
Um, and the same thing's happening on LinkedIn, by the way. Now there are these kind of pre-populated messages that I get through LinkedIn that say, "Hey, Sharon, wondering if you're interested in blah, blah, blah." Well, I know they haven't looked at my profile because I don't have a company right now.
Yeah.
So I have no reason to buy any kind of software,
Yeah.
and it irritates me, right? So when I get an email that's like, I know was written for me. "Hey, Sharon, I saw your video on such and such. I would love to talk to you about blah, 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 because I'm struggling with this right now." That is the email I'm going to answer and actually pay attention to. And I feel like we're headed in the same direction with AI. AI can get better and better and better, but you're still going to recognize it as AI. And while some uses of that are acceptable and we're going to just be like, okay, we know this is the way it's done. Um, if someone's contacting you and asking you for something or asking you to sit in on a pitch and they use AI, that's just irritating.
Yeah.
It's disrespectful. And the person, and this happens very few times, the person who actually goes in and learns something about you and taps into something that you care about, that's the person who's going to get the attention.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. The pendulum's going to swing back. That human authenticity and relevance, and someone taking the time to learn something about you that's real, that's not something that AI found. Those are the people who are going to get the engagement. And businesses that can leverage both, and that's exactly what Boardroom Insiders did. Businesses that can leverage both at the same time and know when to be human versus leverage the productivity benefits of AI, those are the ones that are going to do well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think about that with like even recorded music. We've gone all the way to digital, but there's been this reversion to vinyl and it's actually saved record sales because people want that real story. I mean, we know the story of vinyl, so it just
Yeah,
makes sense. I mean, it's a warm analog feel, but there's a story behind it. It's more tangible in a much better way. And I think it's that thing. At the end of the day, I look at all of the things that I've done business wise, and everything that ever amounts to anything is because it was an actual human relationship, you know?
that's true. That's true. And I think, especially with the 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 propensity of AI to generate fake stuff or
Yeah.
inaccurate things, and we already have this big problem with fake news and misinformation and disinformation. I think people are craving real
Yeah.
stuff, true things,
Mhm.
real people, real talk. And I think that's what I've been able to tap into with my TikTok videos, which got a response that completely surprised me. But when I analyze why is it that this is resonating so much with people, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because I'm very candid. I tell the truth. I tell, you know, the embarrassing truth about my own finances when I sold my company and how much being a startup entrepreneur decimated my own finances. So that's refreshing to people versus people fronting and saying, "Oh, I'm just so hugely
Yeah.
successful." And people are sick of that, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely, they are. So let me ask you this: at the end of the day, Sharon, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Uh,
Uh,
um, I'm getting closer to finding that out, but I do have a perspective, I guess, on that. Um, and by the way, it's helpful to have certain self awareness at the age of almost 60 because I can kind of manage my own anxieties. I am fear driven for sure. A lot of my determination comes from fear and from a scarcity mindset, and I have to constantly manage that. But I'm learning to trust myself and my abilities a lot more these days. I have a lot of confidence in myself more than I've ever had because I've been on this journey where, it's like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. And then it works. And that's not to say that everything's going to work, but I am able to shut out the naysayers and also quickly assess which ones matter and which ones don't,
yeah,
and then move on accordingly. If you get a
absolutely.
lot of criticism, you can say, okay, I'm going to listen to that person, but I'm not going to listen to that person because you can get a quick read after years of experience on who just wants to preserve the status quo or who's concerned about what you're doing just because they're worried about you personally. It feels really good to be able to make those quick assessments and proceed with confidence.
Absolutely. So if anyone wants to hire you, reach out, learn more about what you're doing, where do they go?
They can go to SharonKGillenwater.com. That's middle initial K. They can find me on LinkedIn or TikTok, and I have you know kind of a full service site where you can basically sign up to have a meeting with me or send me a message or watch all of my free content, which is like a master class in bootstrapping entrepreneurship.
Excellent. Sharon, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being candid and open. I appreciate your story today. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care.